Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Suhu podcast. We are officially in season 2. Last season was our winter arc. We were talking a lot about how your skincare routine interacts with those harsher winter conditions, colder air with less moisture and all that good stuff. This season, we're launching into spring. And I think the obvious thing would be to launch a spring product or chase the whole spring cleaning trope. But instead of doing any of that, we are just going to launch our Spring Reveals series. So this series is going to be broken up into 3 parts. The first part, Spring Reveals What's Inside. We're going to talk about what's actually in the products that we're putting on our skin and how they're manufactured and how they're processed and packaged. After that, we'll spend 4 weeks talking about what spring reveals about what changes in our routines and the environment in this transitional season. And then we'll wrap things up for the last 4 weeks with spring reveals what holds. So what actually holds up through the test of time, through these changing seasons in our skincare routine when it's built for the long term. For spring reveals, what's inside this week, we want to talk about something that came up because of an Instagram message we got. So someone last sent us a message asking, are your products organic or all natural? And that kind of keyed Lydia and I into talking about what do those words actually mean and how are we describing our products? So yeah, natural and organic are 2 words that people often treat as signals of quality. I think that person that messaged me wanted to know, are your products a good quality? Are they healthy for me? Are they healthy for the environment? And those words, they feel reassuring and they suggest that something might be safer or gentler or more responsible environmentally. But those words, first of all, are not interchangeable and they don't answer the same question, but they do get blurred together and it causes a lot of confusion. So people assume they're learning something meaningful about a product when in reality, they're just hearing this comforting adjectives. Today, what we want to do is slow that down. We're not trying to dismiss those terms completely. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we do want to understand what each of these terms is actually describing. Because from a sourcing and system standpoint, natural and organic, they operate very differently. And Lydia, from a chemistry standpoint, those labels don't really change how molecules behave on the skin, do they?
Right. And yeah, I think the most important thing is just like an ingredient, as long as the ingredient is what it's supposed to be and the product is being transparent about it and it's processed in a way that doesn't introduce harmful ingredients or, carry pesticides through and things like that, then you can generally look at things as reliable. But you have to understand not just the sourcing, but also the processing. And I think we're going to dig into that today a little bit.
Totally, yeah. So let's start with natural. What does natural actually mean? Lydia, from maybe a layperson standpoint, what do you think when you hear natural?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm vegan, so I think of plant derived, but then the first thing that comes into my mind is well, does it really mean that? Because a animal is technically natural, right? And then I'm like, oh, it's interesting because rocks are technically natural. They're made through natural processes. So then I start to think, oh, I guess it just means maybe not synthetic. Like I didn't make it in a lab, in my chemistry lab or something. But then, I'm still questioning, well, I don't know, maybe the ingredients I used in my lab process were from natural sources. So I'm not
And
really sure.
you're a human, and a human is an animal, and an animal is natural. And I think now we
Right?
are circling in on the key point here, which is, at least in cosmetics and in the United States, natural doesn't have a standardized legal definition. There's no fixed threshold. There's no certification body that enforces it. So if
What about in food? I'm curious.
in food, natural is more regulated. The FDA does have certain certain rules around how you use that word. But for example, in food, if I have a strawberry soda, if you look on the back, you'll often see something like natural flavors. And that is FDA regulated. But all that means is that the source of that flavoring compound comes from a natural place. So your strawberry natural flavors could be coming from wood pulp or some fermentation process. Your natural flavors in vanilla, there's an anal gland in beavers that is often expressed, and that is the natural flavor of that vanilla. But when you see natural flavors and you're thinking vanilla, your mind goes to this vanilla pod or these vanilla beans, but that's not necessarily what that means. But yeah, at its most literal level, natural is describing something indeterminate about the origin of your ingredients. So it
Wow,
tells you.
that's crazy.
Yeah, wow, it is pretty crazy. Red 40, that's another one that will come up as a natural food dye, but that just is because it's coming from crushed up bugs that happen to turn into a red color. And then that processing that is happening to those bugs is very unnatural. But because that source is a bug, that ingredient has started in a plant, a mineral, or another non-petrochemical source. That is a natural flavor or a natural coloring. Because there's no regulation on this word that's going on your label, I could sell Vaseline, which is a petrochemical, which is derived from petrochemicals, as natural, because where do those petrochemicals come? Fossilized plant material from thousands and thousands of years ago. So like, yeah, and that sounds like a ridiculous example, but there are a lot of instances where plant derived ingredients go through significant refinement and they're purified and stabilized or chemically modified so that they work well in a formula and remain stable on a shelf. But in your mind, in most consumers' minds, all of that purification and processing is not natural. But there's nothing stopping a brand from slapping that word natural on there to describe their product. But
Yeah, and I think the key thing with that, right, is like it gets at the core of our message today, which is not all processing is bad. Not all like chemicals are bad. Like we want to like make that very clear. But what we want to understand is like natural doesn't tell you anything about those processes. And so you could have a product that's grown very sustainably. It goes through the right processing. There are not other toxins introduced or other problems with that process. It gets put into a formulation that is really well designed and it also functions nicely on your skin. You can have all those things happen and the word natural never appears anywhere, right? And then you can look at marketing a product and they say natural, lavender or something like that. And your brain automatically goes, oh, like beautiful lavender fields is going to be great, aroma therapy product or something like that. And then when you look at it, it's like fragrance and it's mostly synthetic and there's maybe some kind of like plant derived extract in there at some point in the product, but then it performs bad on your skin because it's irritating to your skin barrier and it doesn't function well. And you're like, what the heck, right? So it's really important that you are able to kind of look at a brand and understand what they're actually like building up to in their final product, right?
yeah, and I think that essential oil is a really good example because even if you are getting a really good natural, like pure essential oil that is grown in the right way and processed in the right way that you feel is natural, that natural label still isn't saying anything about how that's going to behave on your skin. There are lots of natural substances that are incredibly reactive, and some essential oils are a great example. They're directly from plants, but depending on the concentration and the condition of your skin, they can absolutely cause irritation.
Yeah, for sure. It's super important to like know that whoever is, especially with essential oils, that whoever is making your product has like a deep understanding of essential oils and like can use them properly. I think there are so many trending products in the market that use quote unquote essential oils, but they're, not at the right concentration or they aren't the pure essential oil. They weren't produced correctly. They are just, in fact, not an essential oil at all. And I think, there's some brands that like maybe don't fully understand their own supply chains, right? And so this would surprise them. But then I think there are also brands that are like very intentionally doing this to save money. And yeah, it's like a learning curve for everybody, right? Like the more knowledgeable we are, the more we can understand the ingredients and the processes that we use to extract them and modify them. But yeah, it's really about building these like reliable supply chains. And yeah, in a market where things are super cluttered and there's so many trending products and you look and you can find rosemary hair oil and they say essential oil and it's $5, like that's crazy, right? Like that's simply not possible. And yeah, it just brings into a lot of questions because those products are often marketed as natural and good for the environment and good for you. So, yeah, be careful out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you're saying, a lot of these brands, they know that when we hear the word natural, we think good for ourselves, good for the environment. But the key takeaway in this segment is that natural is not a legally defined word, and there is no certification body stamping approval on this. So, the only semi reliable information you're getting is where some of your ingredients ultimately started, not how it was processed, not how it performs. In many cases, like we're trying to say, natural doesn't mean good for you, doesn't mean good for the environment. It's just a convenient greenwashing term for marketing and labeling. So, what about organic? What does organic actually mean? Organic does function differently than natural. In the United States, organic certification is governed through the USDA National Organic Program. And that program regulates something very specific, which is the agricultural practices behind the ingredients. So, that's things like soil management, pesticide restrictions, and farming standards. So, if an ingredient is certified organic, it just means that the agricultural process that produced it met documented standards and was verified by a certifying body. So, in that way, organic does have a bit more teeth than natural. There is somebody looking over the shoulder of these companies. And if the organic stamp is on that bottle, that means that they have followed the agricultural processes as defined by the USDA National Organic Problem or Program.
Yeah, so that makes me kind of curious, like, how do we know as a consumer if an ingredient is certified organic? You really have to be careful to look for the actual certification stamp. Like, I'm curious if you can dig into that a little bit, because I know sometimes when I'm perusing ingredients and things, I'll see organic in the label, but then when I look for more information, I don't find that anywhere.
Yeah, so this is where organic can function really similarly to natural. The word organic itself can appear on any product. There's no rule against saying you're an organic skincare cream if you're not an organic skincare cream. The key here is not to rely on the word in the labeling, but actually looking for the USDA organic seal. The USDA National Organic Program is a certifying body, and when they look at a product and determine that the ingredients behind it are farmed organically, then they put their seal on the product. Without that seal on the product, organic doesn't really mean anything in the same way that natural can be twisted. Like,
And one thing that's like super important here, right, is like you're not necessarily looking for the organic USDA seal on the final product. You might be, depending on what the ingredients are, but what you're really looking for is in the ingredients that are, farmed and are processed as like the whole plant or processed as part of the plant. You want to understand that that piece doesn't have pesticides in them, right? And so it's kind of crazy, but like depending on how certain, you might not think about this. So you think about when you eat an apple, you're like, okay, I have the apple. Is there pesticide on the apple? And like, how has it been treated in the field? But the same thing goes for like skincare ingredients that are like essential oils or like jojoba oil or these things like that, right? Like you want to understand not just like the farming practices, but also, kind of how they're processed. And the organic gets at the farming practices and at the individual level. And I think York can share a little bit about the planet health because this is, I think, different. But at the individual health level, generally speaking, the pesticides used in organic processes on the farm are a bit safer for you, right, than other more synthetic derived pesticides. And so when you're thinking about an essential oil, like sometimes the way that plant oils are processed, essential or just regular oil, sometimes the way they're processed removes pesticides, but sometimes the way they're processed doesn't. And there's not necessarily a fault in the processing there. It's just like the way that the plant is prepped. So you can just think about like, oh, I chop up my apple. That's the way of processing the apple so I can eat chopped apples, right? Same thing with the skincare ingredients. It's going through some kind of process. And sometimes the pesticides come with it. And so you want to be cognizant of looking for organic, in front of ingredients like that. And that's something that you can kind of dig into. Like the brand should be transparent. Like, are they using USDA certified organic jojoba oil? Like, look for that on their website, right? And they might not tell you, exactly who is the source because that's like some proprietary information, but you should be able to see somewhere that that's like a certified organic product. And most good brands will do that. And yeah, so that helps you kind of understand at the individual level, like the safety of these ingredients that, come from a farm, right? And this doesn't really get into ingredients that come from a lab or that are like heavily processed into their individual components, but it's definitely great for things like plant oils and essential oils and products that are like, maybe like scents and things that are like coming from like an actual farm.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Organic is an agricultural term. It is not a chemistry term. It's not telling you anything about how the product is processed, and it's not telling you anything about how the product is functioning on your skin. And another place where we see a lot of confusion is organic does not necessarily mean sustainable. Organic is referring to things like no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers, with some exceptions, no GMOs, restrictions on certain processing methods, soil management requirements, and there's some certification and auditing that goes into that. But sustainability is a much broader category. For instance, organic is not looking at water usage or land use and biodiversity or transportation distance or carbon emissions or packaging or yield efficiency. So something might be organic, but not necessarily sustainable. For example, if I'm sourcing all of my corn from a large organic corn farm that's only growing corn in this giant monoculture, that's going to impact, that's going to degrade the soil and impact the biodiversity in that area. Or if I'm sourcing organic blueberries, but they're being flown in from Antarctica, that's going to be pretty carbon intensive, not necessarily very good for the environment. Is more helpful, I think, than natural in that it's giving you a better sense of the origin of these ingredients and what went into actually growing them, but it's still missing a lot of pieces that might be important to you as a consumer that's looking for something that's going to work on your skin, that's healthy for your body and healthy for the planet.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so once we separate origin and agriculture, we get into the real question, which is how are these products functioning? As Lydia, maybe you could talk a little bit about what's going to give us more information about the actual functionality of these products.
Yeah, I want to begin by saying, like, I think both the terms natural and organic kind of play on our heartstrings around, like, something comes from a farm and it's processed in this beautiful way, and then we get to use it on our skin. And I think that that exists, right, in like certain essential oils and certain plant oils. And it is actually really great when it's done properly. You're like, wow, this product is not just like beautiful from like a sensory standpoint and like the story, but it also is like really functional because it's actually using plants that help our skin and help our skin barrier. But with that all being said, like we've been saying, like, you can slap those words on it. It doesn't necessarily mean that at all. And so I want to just take this as a moment to recognize that when things are like processed in a lab or created in a lab, that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad either. You still just have to look at the process. Like, are they using a lot of wasteful solvents and things? Are they contributing to a lot of water usage where they could be, maybe conserving water better? Are there, pollutants that are coming along in the purification process in the lab? Are they holding themselves to high standards? So the question always kind of comes down to this, like processing and the source. To get at whether or not something's functional really has to do with, is the ingredient that you think you're putting on your skin actually the ingredient? And at the most fundamental level, you can take that down to the molecular structure if we want to get really technical, but I'm going to do this in a way that should hopefully make sense. Like, let's just think about something very simple. A lot of times you may see salicylic acid in a topical product, and that salicylic acid is usually for treating mild acne. It might be in some cleansers, some acidic treatments. Salicylic acid, like plant-derived compound, it's from willow bark, but you can also make salicylic acid in a lab. And in fact, it's often one of the like organic chemistry projects in college if you take that class. Like you might make salicylic acid, So you can basically create this compound manually as a human, or you can purify it out of willow bark. Different processes, right? But both of them, if done correctly, should yield salicylic acid and only salicylic acid. Maybe a few other things come along the way, but it's mostly pure. And that structure is what's going to predict the function in the actual formula. So if it is what they say it is, it should act consistently in the group of people that it's designed to treat or help in the same way that a drug should. Where things start to get complicated is as you start to use more materials, for example, and as you start to use more whole plants. So think about an essential oil like lavender. Lavender essential oil has a whole breadth of molecules. It's not just one causing an effect. There's many in there. And that's what's so beautiful about the plant is we get to have this, breadth of helpful molecules that we're going to put on our skin, but it introduces some complexity because now where the lavender is grown has an impact on what molecules are in it and the percentages of each one. The soil health has similar impact. The processing, how the lavender is, steam distilled or processed into the essential oil matters. You may lose some compounds or not, depending on the quality of the processing. So when you get to that final product, it's like one lavender essential oil might look one way, and then another brand's might look a little different. And as long as they're doing it properly, those differences might not matter. But some brands will really, 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 either lie about their processing or they'll lie about what is actually in there. Instead of lavender essential oil, it might be a synthetic fragrance that was made in a lab, but it has one compound and not the beautiful breath that was like purified from the plant. So the key thing here is just going back to that structure predicts function. The more you understand, the we're not going to like go and test every single thing that we do for every single molecule in it and expect that every molecule must match every time. But what you're aiming for is finding brands that are really consistent, that are honest about their processing, that do high quality processing. And you should be able to get pretty consistent products that function properly because they're using the materials in an intentional way and they're processing them in an intentional way. And so I'm always questioning brands that have 40, 50, 35 ingredients in them that are like all these different plant extracts. And they're like, oh my gosh, we have all these amazing plant extracts. There's like 20 of them in there. And I'm just thinking, like, how is it possible that they understand the supply chain and the processing of all those different plant extracts and can really guarantee that each one of those extracts is consistent across all of their batches? Maybe they can, but it really puts like a red light going off in my mind when I think about things like that. So especially if you have sensitive skin and things like that, like the more ingredients in a product, the more options for potential irritants to be introduced or potential contaminants. So you want to be just cognizant about when you're looking at different brands, like understand one, why they're using each ingredient. And if they're using a lot of excess ones, question that. And they should also be transparent about like where the ingredient's coming from and like even better, how it's processed if they have that information.
Yeah, absolutely. An organic salicylic acid and a conventionally grown salicylic acid with the same molecular profile are going to behave the same way on your skin. But that being
Yes.
said, you need the information about the sourcing and the processing, the refinement, the concentration in order to actually make an informed decision about your products. And that's where the conversation shifts from just reassuring language to actual measurable standards and measurable transparency. So none of this is meant to say that the words natural or the words organic are completely useless. They describe in some parts the beginnings of an ingredient's journey. Natural can tell you a little bit about the origin sometimes, and organic can describe a lot about the agricultural certification standards behind a product. But for values driven consumers, if you care about your health and the planet, the sourcing practices matter a ton. The processing practices and the packaging processes, they matter a lot. And so transparency around those processes is much more important than these reassuring adjectives when we're trying to support informed decisions. And if we want clarity, we need to look beyond just the words on the label. And so we at Suhu want to lead the charge in this regard. So Lydia, I want to pose this user's question directly to you. Are our products organic or all natural?
I think this is a really great question, and I'm so glad that someone asked it in our DMs. And if you ever have questions, you can always ask. So in terms of natural, I would say similar to what we've been talking about, our products could be described as natural in the way other products could be. But I would say for me personally, like when I'm thinking of our products, everything is vegan. So if that resonates with you, you can think of it that way too. And then from an organic standpoint, I think, the way I think about looking at ingredients is I care about the source and the processing, right? And so for me, when I'm looking at any ingredients that could carry through pesticides, like we were talking about before, then the agricultural practices do matter. And because organic is a certifiable standard and the pesticides are not synthetic, I look for organic ingredients where it applies. So anytime that you're looking at something where the pesticide could get carried through, or it's a whole plant, or it's part of a whole plant, all of those ingredients are organic, and they're all USDA certified organic ingredients. And you can see that on our website. You can just look at the origin of each ingredient when you scroll down on the product page. That's how I would answer your question. And then I would say, just adding a few more things in the cases where we are using, the pure ingredient or the pure compound, I'm looking for a few additional things. So I'm looking that ingredient was processed in a way that is as sustainable as possible. So not, coming from palm oil plants, right? Or looking for processes that are, making sure that labor laws are upheld in whatever place in the world that those ingredients are coming from originally. In the few cases where we have some lab produced or modified ingredients, like our vitamin C serum, right? Like the lab that makes that for us, I really understand and trust their processes, and they're in the United States, and I can get a clear understanding and, a clear report on, the purity and things of the ingredient. So yeah, it's really a whole scope of things that we're looking at. It's not just the source. I'm really interested in the processes, and where I can be transparent about those, I am on the website. So you should be able to understand, from our product page, not just where things are sourced from, but, what the processing method was. And then also you can get an understanding of the purpose of the ingredient too, which I think is important. Like, our lotion is, 7 ingredients, and like what each ingredient does for you is included in there, because I care about not, including a bunch of excess stuff, right? Like we want it to smell good and feel good, but ultimately introduce as, the fewest amount of irritants as possible as well, so that people with sensitive skin can use our products.
Yeah. So are they all natural? Sure, they are all natural in the way any product on the market is all natural. Are they organic? Yes, we do look at organic certifications for all of our plant-based ingredients. And then the deeper questions, when you're asking about sourcing, when you're asking about processing, Lydia is making a concerted effort to use only properly sourced ingredients and to only use processed ingredients from labs that she trusts as a PhD chemist. So I think the whole point of this has been organic and all natural. They're not telling you enough. But if you want to learn more about our products, we do provide as much information as possible on our website.
Yeah, and you can always ask us. We're super happy to be as open as we can be about exactly where we're getting our ingredients, and yeah, always interested in improving too. So if you ever notice something, you're like, hey, like, can you do it better? The answer is we'll
We'll
definitely
try.
try.
So, yes, in conclusion, the simple takeaway here is, natural and organic describe a little bit about where something began. It's not going to tell you how well it works. It's not going to tell you how healthy it is for your skin. It's not going to tell you how healthy it is for the planet. That performance is coming from the chemistry and the formulation logic and its compatibility with your skin. But when you separate those ideas out, the labels start to matter a little bit less, and you can appreciate sourcing transparency without assuming that it guarantees performance. And if you want to go deeper into this topic, we have a whole blog post written about it on our website, suhuskin.com. Please check it out. And if there are other label claims that have you confused, then let us know. We would love to discuss those. Like I said, this whole podcast came from a message that we got in our Instagram DMs, and we love engaging with you guys. So keep it coming. But yeah, thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in again next week. Bye.